there's the 5, 6 biblical stories everybody knows. Garden of Eden, good and evil, flood, Exodus from Egypt. I mean, most of them due to the popularity in cinema, modern cinema, was the 10 Commandments or the Prince of Egypt and so on. But then there's also the classic story with Jacob and Esau, the wrestling, the battling twins. And of course later the story with the Jacob wrestling with the angel. May not be as popular as some of the other stories, but it's still pretty well known. And though it happened thousands of years ago, yet in it lies tremendous lessons, psychological, profound psychological, emotional, and spiritual lessons for us today. And not forced. When you read it properly, and you hear the story in that context, not just as an episode that happened so long ago, it really comes alive, and you're like, it could be, I speak for myself, it blows you away that such a story so many years ago has such relevance in our contemporary society. So exactly that. These twins are at battle from the moment that they're conceived, basically. In their mother's womb, they're already fighting. That's where the chapter begins. And Rebecca, who's their mother, has these twins struggling within, and she has a terrible pregnancy, terrible pain. She turns to God, why am I in such pain? Why is this hard? She recognized it was a difficult pregnancy. She never had children before, but she saw others. She had a mother, and she had, family and so on. So God said to her, because you have 2 nations within you, and they're struggling for dominance, for control. When this one rises, this one will fall. When this one rises, the other one rises, the other one will fall. And yes, exactly what happens. They come when they're born, they are very different. The Bible puts it very, very succinctly. It says, and poignantly, that Esav, Ish Sayed, Ish Milchama Yedid Sayed. He was a warrior, man of war. He knew how to hunt. He knew how to trap. He was a great war strategist. And then there was Jacob, his alter ego, antithesis. Jacob, Ish Yeshiv Aholim, Ish Tom Yeshiv Aholim. Man of, you could say, Tom means wholesomeness, innocence, peace, completeness. The scholar. So you have the warrior and the scholar. And these are twins. And they look different, they behave differently, but they're twins. And they struggle first in pregnancy, then in their early childhood, and throughout their lives, the story of their struggles. I've discussed this chapter many times in different contexts. I want to talk about the struggle itself and how it reflects on our lives. And this doesn't even require a lot of thinking. If you just ask yourself, where are the struggles in your own life? So we all have conflicts. Who doesn't have conflicts? Now, sometimes we think we're like multiple personalities, at least a dual personality. We have struggles, the different voices inside of us. Our heart tells us one thing, our mind tells us another. Yeah. You have the voice of survival, the egocentric voice, the voice that is self-absorbed. My needs, my gratification. I need to take care of myself. And then you have the other voice. The voice says, no, help another. The voice of transcendence, the voice of higher purpose. And everyone has these 2 voices. How much time each voice has in your life, only you know. Maybe it would be a good exercise. I know you need a little time and concentration to, like in a day, take like a type of survey. Maybe we should make an app like that. That's a good idea. Where when you have this voice speaking to you and this voice speaking to you, just to figure out like who's a louder voice and who dominates, and how do you act when the 2 voices conflict. Obviously, if we don't pay much attention, we all know where the default is going to go. The lower common denominator, the easier approach, which is always self. It's like gravity. You let something, you don't pay any effort, the inertia is just going to fall and just go downward. However, when you apply yourself and you think about it, you reflect, then usually the mind has more say than the heart. You don't reflect the heart, the impulsive heart is generally more powerful. Not because it's more powerful, because you're not allowing yourself to fight it or to resist it. But we all know intelligent people, when someone makes you an offer in business or in other ways, if you're intelligent, but you don't just buy into it because emotionally the person manipulated you or was able to make a good sale. Your mind, your reflective mind says, I have to think about it. And if you're trying to retain some objectivity, there's pros and there's cons, and you come back and say, you know what? It may seem appealing, it feels good and all that, but it's not for me. Unfortunately, most of us go the other way. That's why we make mistakes. How many times has someone, let's say, insulted you or said something to you that you took as a negative, you reacted immediately in a very angry way or a very retaliatory way. A day or two pass and you regret why you reacted that way, because then you actually find out that the person never meant it, and so on and so forth. There's a perfect example of an impulsive reaction. Had you reflected another day, you still could come back and say, hey, something, you know something? It's inappropriate what you did. But we don't think like that. The heart doesn't think, period. It reacts. It's an impulsive reaction, knee-jerk. The mind should be telling the heart, you know something? Let's put the brakes on, let's reflect, let's think it over, let's consult, and then we could always go back and determine, maybe we should respond, maybe best to overlook, maybe move on. I mean, what I'm saying here is daily little conflicts we have. Sometimes they have not much significance, they're just minor, trivial things, but sometimes they're very significant. They can be even matters of life and death and major decisions that we make. And now, of course, a lot of this is much more complicated, because it's not just, well, okay, if you're able to just identify, here's your impulsive heart, here's your reflective mind, great. The problem is it gets so convoluted, your heart is convincing your mind that it's subjective. That's part of the problem. In Tanya, he has a brilliant chapter 9, where he describes this conflict, and he says, just like the blood of the heart rushes to the mind and brain, because the brain needs blood, so too the impulsive emotions of the heart rush to the mind and make the mind think to justify your subjective position. How often have we been guilty of that? Now, most people don't like to admit that, and they may not even know it. That bias and prejudices are affecting your mind, and you really change your arguments due to a subjective position. This is why we have honesty, integrity, recusing yourself in a position, let's say a judge or another person who's in the power of make a decision. If you have an interest, you should recuse yourself, etc. Because the fact of the matter is, bias blinds us, and bias, prejudice blinds even the wise. That's how it is, and that's the nature of the beast. The only thing is, you're expected to acknowledge that, and then you can get some control over it. So it gets very mixed up, because many decisions in our life, we may think we made a rational, objective decision, when in fact it was based on an emotional impulse that dressed up and masqueraded like an intellectual argument. That's what we're very good at. Smart people are excellent at covering their tracks and finding ways to make sure everybody else is to blame, etc., etc. Like the guy that goes to the psychiatrist and convinces him that he's the one that's a madman and he should be locked up, and the patient should be the psychiatrist. There are smart people that can do that. I'm not saying they're always wrong. Many psychiatrists maybe need their own help. Some people who are in that field, that's why they entered that field. But I'm not here to pass judgment on that. That's case by case, But going back to our theme here, so two voices. So the battle of Jacob and Esav are actually a Jacob within you and Esav within you. The description in the Torah of these two personalities are two voices within us. One is the warrior. What's a warrior? A warrior is a conqueror, is a dominator, is aggressive. It's taking care of its own needs. It's a battler. Some people, sharks, they call them in business or in other settings. They are out, they're go-getters, aggressive, ready to step on anyone just to win. And then there's another voice. The other voice is the Ishtam. Not a strategist, not a manipulative, not that shrewd. The person is an innocent voice that just wants to have some calm and peace, is introspective, studies, prays, soulful. Basically, you could say one is body-like and one is soul-like. And we have both of them within us. And guaranteed, without question, each of you here, everyone listening to this, myself, we can identify things in our day or our lives that are body-like, which means more physical-oriented, basically is driven by our bodily and physical and material needs, say materialism, matter, and spirit. And then there are things that are more spiritually driven. When I say spiritual, I mean in a more broader sense. I don't mean necessarily religious, transcendent. For example, when you're busy with your needs, which is to pay your bills, to take care of your health, or take care of your own eating, sleeping, and so on, then there's the other side of us, transcendent, where we want something beyond the daily quotidian, the daily grind and routine. And some of us express it through art, music, literature, travel, religion, faith, love, romance. Now, of course, these are not mutually exclusive. There's an overlap. There are things that are transcendent that obviously are body and physical related. There are things that are physical that have some type of ethereal and ephemeral nature. But if you were to, generally speaking, there are two voices. And these two voices were put in us. Sometimes they're called the animal soul and the divine soul. Sometimes they're called the Yetzer Tov, the Yetzer Hara. The good inclination, the negative inclination. And essentially they're the distinction between what I said before, one's own needs, and the other is the transcendent voice. Survival and transcendence, if you wish. Now, frankly, just left at that, without any excess, both are necessary. You need to have a warrior. Who's going to protect you in case there's danger? You do need to be able to hunt. And hunt, I mean this in the broader sense. I don't mean necessarily physically go out and hunt, but I mean to go out and get what you need to survive, to pay your bills, to eat, and so on. The problem becomes when one dominates over the other and one enslaves, actually. It takes hostage the other. In most cases, and this is an expression from Hasidic thought, the soul is imprisoned in the body. What that means is that the body's needs, instant gratification, our temptations, the forces that seduce us, our emotional impulses control the soul's behavior. Because the soul can't travel anywhere without the body. So if the material needs of a person become the dominant force, the soul becomes trapped. And that's called basically the golus, the displacement of the soul within the body. So how the mystics explain it is that Yeridus HaNeshama B'guf, which means the descent of the soul in the body upon conception. When we are born, well, I would say first conceived and then born, basically a spiritual divine soul, Jacob, is entering into a body-like environment, an Esav environment. So right from conception, right in pregnancy, right in the early stages, is already a battle. You know, when you think of it, it is part of the mysteries of existence. But what some point happens is an egg is fertilized by the male seed, right? And it's one cell. At that point, it's barely visible. That cell will begin to multiply. The miracle of creation. Literally a miracle. And pop, here we are, sitting in the room with all our neurosis and all our stuff. You know? It all began with one little cell that you could never imagine would turn into this complex individual that each of us is. Right? Okay. So there's the physiological development, which I'm going to really address here. No, the stages, the first semester, the first trimester, second, and so on. But there's also more than that going on. It's not just a body developing. We know there's a life taking place. Because at some point, there will be a heart that will beat, and a mind that will work, and at some point it will be us. It may be a newborn child, so it's a child that's still not fully actualized. But it all begins at the early stages. So there's actually discussions in the Talmud, when does the life begin? When can you call it a life? The truth is, it should be a life for a second, because if it's a life for a second, something made it grow from one cell to multiply into two cells, and to four, and so on and so forth. So it's really growing as a life force from the moment of conception. The question, however, is when we can call it a defined life force, or the different stages. Again, this is not a place to go into. The Torah has fascinating stages of how it describes the development, not just the medical terms. But one thing is clear, two forces are meeting each other. Because we're going to have at the end is going to have a body. I'm talking about the vessel, the container, which is our physical body, and I'm talking now everything, from head to toe, the skeleton, the organs, the limbs, and of course the internal organs, and all the forces and all the cells and everything. And then there's something which I call soul, because the soul is not a stereotype for me. Some people don't like soul, so they use electricity, if you like, energy, a force, whatever you want to call it. As we know, these are semantics. The point is, it's not just a corpse. You're not just having a body without a soul, because if that would be the case, God forbid, that would be a death. That would be a miscarriage. That would be a stillborn child, God forbid. So you have two things working together. But medicine and biology and science can really mostly talk about, obviously, the body part. Because the body part is visible. You can observe it, you can examine, you can test, and you can study it. The soul part is a lot harder because there's no way, no one has ever seen a soul. You know, how do you put it under a microscope? and yet there is definitely a developing life force. So we have a whole body of Torah, maybe I shouldn't call it body of Torah, call it the soul of Torah, that actually talks about the dynamics of the soul. So just like there's a physical DNA and genome, there's a spiritual DNA and genome. And there's spiritual cells, and there's spiritual components and organs and limbs and so on. They're not obviously physical nature, but there's the power of vision, just like there's an eye, there's the power to see. And we know an eye is not enough to see. You need a power to see, because you can have, God forbid, someone dies at 120 years and their eyes are intact, but they can't see any longer because there's no power of vision. There's only the physical container. Think of it like a light bulb without electricity. The light bulb may be intact, but there's no juice running into it. So the discussions, especially in the mystical, the Kabbalistic, Kabbalah and Hasidus talk a lot about the dynamics of the soul, which is really the basis of a lot of what I speak about in these classes. Most of my teachings is understanding that, because by understanding, like just like you can't heal a body without understanding it, like you have to know what is it made of, what does it need, what is it deficient in, what vitamins, minerals, exercises it may need to stimulate and grow and expand, etc., or heal. Same thing with the soul and the psyche. If you don't understand its pieces, it's not just saying, oh, you know what, okay, here, take this pill and make you feel good. There's actually forces that are ticking inside of us that can be exercised, and as a result, heal from psychic and psychological and emotional challenges, as well as issues like depression or issues like anxiety. Now, I'm not rolling out to saying that sometimes you need a combination of both, medicine and that type of so-called spiritual therapy. But it's very clear that psyche-related things need understanding of the psyche. It's not going to help understand the anatomy of a leg to treat a human psyche in that sense. So the struggle between Esav and Jacob, which is really just names that personify two voices within us, is the struggle between the matter and spirit of our beings. And that struggle begins very early in our lives, as I said, even before we're conscious of it, as soon as body meets soul, as soon as the physical meets the spirit, the physical meets the spirit. You know, in a way you could make some comparison, if you think in physics, between matter and energy. So we know Einstein, in his special theory of relativity, E equals mc squared, proved and shown, and today accepted fact, that energy and matter are really two sides of one coin, and they're basically reversible. The simple example of it, you take a piece of wood, it seems to be a piece of matter, you ignite it, you put it into a fire, it turns into fuel, that gives off warmth and light. Another example, you have liquid water, H2O, you heat it, it becomes a gas, a vapor, you cool it, you freeze it, it becomes ice. So you have a solid piece of ice. If you're completely ignorant of what this ice is, you'd think that's all it is. Suddenly it melts, turns into liquid into gas. And this is a reversible again and again and again, which is actually the whole process of evaporation and rain, and the weather systems are all based on this cycle. My point that I'm saying is, I'm using simple examples. Obviously, Einstein proved it a lot deeper than that, because even on a very subatomic level and atomic level, matter and energy are reversible. And frankly, some physicists will actually say what you see when you look with your eyes, your five senses, your eyes, ears, taste, touch, and smell, you're not seeing reality. You're seeing the outer surface of a projection of subatomic particles interacting with each other. So, for example, like let's take colors, for example. We all know today, there's no such thing as an objective color, really. White is the natural color. But the prism, which means, for example, something is green, so it reflects in a way that affects the light wave, so you see that spectrum on the light wave, which is called green. So some people even argue that there's no such thing as really a green object. It's just a type of object that we call green because its particles, or let's put it, it's not the personality. Its makeup is that blocks certain light waves, and therefore it reflects as green. I don't want to go further into it. I'm just trying to point out is that what you see is not always what you get. You know, you see something, you see the surface level, and therefore you can really argue that all of existence is really energy, just packaged in the package called matter, which is You can say that very well. If someone asked you about yourself, tell me, who are you? Are you some of your body parts? Or are you a personality? Are you a person with a mind and a heart that thinks a certain way and feels a certain way? We all know we'd rather see ourselves, and we do see ourselves as personalities rather than just a lump of clay made up of certain physical components with blue eyes, blonde hair, bald, not bald, whatever it may be that defines us. 5 feet, 6 feet. Those are measurements. Those are proportions of our container. But if someone to say, who are you? Who do I love? I don't love the container. I love what's inside the container. And I also love the container that it's inside of. So when you think of it that way, which is obviously we're not trained to think that way because we are linear thinking people, and we look at things on the surface. But when you give it a little thought, you realize, 1 second, the surface is exactly that. Someone were to ask you, what is the sea, the ocean? Let's say you have a child, first time you take the child to the ocean, you show them big ocean, Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, Mediterranean, whatever. And the child said, what is this thing? Okay, so the basic example would be, the scripture, it's a body of water, it covers 2/3 of the earth, and is that it? Because that's all you see. Say, no. There are fish inside, and there are other species. And not only that, there's more than that. Now, if we never went undersea, we never took cameras down there, and we never scuba dived, what would we know? You see a few fish jumping out once in a while. Then you see a fin here and there, so you realize they're sharks and they're whales. And maybe if you observe long enough, you'll come up, there's hundreds of species, fine. But no one would ever in their right mind ever predict that the world under the sea is more complicated than the world on land. It has a terrain that is more complicated, mountains and valleys and earthquakes. I believe I read every 8 seconds there's an earthquake under the water somewhere. Minor ones. But the life force is there. As a matter of fact, the Talmud says, everything that exists on land exists in the water. It doesn't say everything exists in water exists on land, which means that the water has everything on land plus more, which today we know as a fact. And there's still mysteries. There are places deep in the sea that they have never explored yet. And we know there are species with all our technology. My point that I'm making, you look at the sea, it seems like just an innocent sea cover with, here and there something's going on, when in fact, the whole thing is brimming with life, and in many ways even more complicated than life on land, on dry land. So when you look at things in a deeper context, you can see that there are two forces inside of us, and in a way they are two sides of one coin. Esav and Jacob are twins. They're not enemies really. They're twins, both necessary. Should everything work well, the soul and the body would join, okay? And the soul would be the captain of the ship, and the body would take the orders and follow where the soul wants to go. Unfortunately, as I said, the soul gets concealed like the water, like the life underwater in the body. And it's usually the other way around. The body's telling the soul where to go, then the other way around. And ask yourself, who's in charge in your life? Think of a hammer and your hand. Your hand should be taking your hammer and knocking nails in where the hand tells the hammer what to do. What would it be like if the hammer starts telling the hand what to do? That wouldn't be very normal, would it? But that's exactly what happens. What drives most of our lives and decisions? Our needs. I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I see something I like, I grab it. You need to have discipline, education, training, maybe deterrence that will tell you, you know what, you don't just grab everything you like. But left to a person's own accord, we could end up being extreme narcissists, very selfish, and everything, me. Me and nothing else. And there are actually people who argue that's really the human being. I mean, just read Richard Dawkins' books, the best of all that captures right in the title, The Selfish Gene. The gene, not just the selfish human being. The gene itself is selfish, because nature, if you take the real radical Darwinian definition, nature is all about survival of the fittest. You and I will fight to survive, and I will destroy you if I need to, and grab the resources, so you shouldn't get those resources. That's the cardinal rule. And you see human beings, unfortunately, very often support that simply by their behavior. The Torah comes and says, no, that's not true. That's unostensibly, that looks that way. And people left on their own without training, without education. But if you really want to know the truth is our souls are the real you, not the body. As I've often described with Freud, it's not the id that drives us, it's the yid that drives us. You know, the spark of the yid, the yud. So we have a force inside of us, yes, that may be narcissistic and very selfish, but there's even a deeper force called the soul. And that's the Jacob within us. And that is the noble side that does not see survival as the beginning and end of everything. Now, if these two work hand in hand, you have a good situation. The soul, like the mind, is the captain of the ship. It tells the body, here's what we need to do today. But that's not what happens. What happens is they get into a mortal combat, and they struggle, and they fight. And they do not see themselves as compatible. However, the fight is not completely equal for one reason. On one hand, the body is more powerful, as I just said, because it's easier. It's in control. It's much easier to live a materialistic life than to live a spiritual life. Let's be honest. It's much easier to live a selfish life than a giving life. You know, easier. I mean, simply in the less effort. You don't have to do anything. Just rely on your own. You know. However, what resonates more, if you start, when you push somebody, you start asking, tell me, what do you expect of yourself? What would you expect of your children? Most people would like to say, I may not live up to it, but my expectations, my idealism is not the narcissistic life. Nobody actually says, I'm proud to be a narcissist. As a matter of fact, narcissists generally don't acknowledge they're narcissists for many reasons. But because it's not something that someone says, I'm a greedy, selfish narcissist. You know? Now, there are some people in history who've been brutally honest, and they just said it the way it is. They said, I am that, and everyone else is that. I'm the only one that admits it. Fine. But most people don't see it as something that's a virtue to look up to. We may fall there. We may gravitate sometimes there, and we may be blinded, and there are times we may be at our worst. But you know, there's an element of pride, human dignity, majesty. And at the end of the day, who do we cry for? And who do we cry for even for ourselves? When you see that person who's given something, a sacrifice to help another person, there's something about it that rings true. Why does it ring true if we're just selfish genes? Because our souls don't forget where they come from. They may be in prison, and they may be held hostage, and they may be blinded by the material world. But there's a part, like I said, a spark that always remains alive, the pilot flame. Sometimes you don't see it. But there's always entry there. There's no person beyond that hope. There are people who've lived lives very indulgent and get so involved in their habits, and they're so comfortable that you may be never able to reach them based on present circumstances. But everyone goes through ups and downs in life. People go through losses, God forbid, changes. Life is not static. And as a result, there's always an opening. I can't say I'm the most experienced person on earth, but I've been around, and I've seen it. Sometimes you see somebody, a friend or a close one, a relative, and you really feel that they're just beyond reach. You can't talk to them. They just have their way of thinking, whether it's destructive or not, and they're just never going to accept it. You never think there'll be an opening. But there are openings. Because the soul always remains, as I said, I may be asleep, but my heart is awake. And people who are really soulful people know how to find the soul in others. Because it's a soul touches a soul, like a heart touches a heart. Obviously, one narcissist is not going to touch another narcissist. But hearts touch hearts and souls touch souls. So in effect, the story of Jacob and Esau is not just about the conflict. That's something you could all say, hey, you know what? Okay, I know I have a conflict. Now what? So how does that help me? What helps you to know is that the conflict can be won. When you understand that these two forces were meant to come together. The soul was meant to come into a body, and it's meant to have a challenge. We're meant to have the battle between matter and spirit. It's not an accident. And it's not something that could have been avoided. That's how the world was created, matter and spirit. However, there's a purpose, because the battle itself brings the best out of you. It brings the best out of the soul. Because when you don't have resistance, and you don't have any type of challenge, then you remain complacent. Think in your own life, when have you excelled most? When there was a challenge, always. When do you jump the highest? When there's some impediment in the way. When do you push more? When there's competition. When there's a deadline, when you've been challenged. An olive produces oil when it's pressed. I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt, I don't know who said it, but she said about women, women are like tea bags. You don't know how strong they are until you put them into hot water. Now, what about men? I guess men just say it's hot. But I guess we also have that. I can't say we may be an inferior species, but we're not that inferior. My point that I'm making here is challenges. Now, when I say challenges, God should bless us all, our challenges should be minimal. They shouldn't be painful, they shouldn't be traumatic. But challenge can be a positive challenge. Positive challenge means you take on a resolution, and you're going to write a book, you're going to take on a project, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. You know it's going to be difficult, but you're now in it, and you got to do it. And then, unfortunately, there are times challenges are not that pleasant, whether it's a loss, a death, being fired, or some other unexpected twist and turn in life that we didn't want. So there again, you can either succumb and just surrender, or you dig deeper and you find greater strengths. So the Yaakov Esav so-called battle, you could say battle between mind and heart, between the Ish Tam Yeshiv Ahalim, the mind, the Yedei Tzayid, and Ishmael Chama, the warrior, the heart, is a battle that's meant to bring out the best in the soul, and also actually in Esav. And it's meant that they ultimately do join. The goal here is not annihilation of the body or a physical world. Judaism does not preach asceticism. It does not preach that the physical world is a bad place. It says the physical world, divorced of its soul, can become a bad place and potentially can lead you to the wrong places. But per se, the body and its needs and so on are not bad things. Take sexuality. From a Jewish point of view, sexuality is not an evil thing. There's no concept of original sin. It's not a necessary evil. Sexuality is the power that God gave the human being to emulate the God, to bring life into this world. And that's why it's associated and connected with some of the deepest powers in the soul, the deepest pleasures, and the deepest forces that can, on one hand, trap us in the worst possible ways, as we know, but also they can lead us to transcendence in the greatest possible ways. It's all about harnessing and disciplining. So there you go, sexuality. Is it a body thing or is it a soul thing? So today, unfortunately, many people have rendered it into a body thing. It's about technique. It's about immediate instant gratification. It's about the moment. In truth, sexuality, we know what it's called in Torah. Torah calls sexuality das, knowledge, to know. Adam knew Eve means Adam was intimate with Eve. Interesting word for sex, for sexuality, knowledge. Because intimacy and sexuality are not the same thing. Sexuality can be a complete hedonistic and body type thing when it's completely focused on pleasure and immediate and instant gratification, or it can be turned into intimacy. Intimacy, knowledge is a whole different thing. It's two human beings' souls connecting. The concept of the soulmate. So then it's a transcendent experience. But, like anything, there's the Esav side, there's the Jacob side. If we succumb to our lowest common denominator, it's about instant gratification. It's about what do I get right now, and that's that. And here too you could see a practical difference. Like I said earlier, just as you can see a dysfunctional, God forbid, child growing up in a dysfunctional home, it'll be immediately expressed in their relationships as adults, their love, their sexuality and intimacy and children and so on. The same thing is here. Healthy sexuality, which is not divorced of its soul, which is intimacy, you'll see is not instant gratification. It may be very pleasurable, but it will spill over into your life. It's unifying. It will not create tension. On the contrary, it's not even that moment, because love is not just when you make love. Like they say, for women, love is a noun. For men, it's a verb. It's not an action. It's a state of being. And that way, it's a fully unifying experience, like knowledge. It's not just an act that you do and then you move on. Sexuality without commitment. Intimacy is a whole life experience. You're intimate human being with another human being, not just the moment that you are in the bedroom together, but your whole life is united for a higher cause and vision. And then the sexuality is lifted to a completely different dimension. I'm just using that as an example because it's a very practical one that everyone can relate to. Because right there, you can take sexuality and can go completely to the hedonistic and very animal side to it, or it can be something that's ethereal. And it's still bodies. We're not talking about spiritual. We're not talking about platonic relationship. We're talking about a physical relationship, but it's infused with the soul, as opposed to a physical relationship that's just infused with bodily pleasure. So that's one example. The same example can be applied to money, to anything of matter. Money can be a very selfish, greedy thing. We know what money can do to people. But money could also be, as the Talmud, the Rashi says, Matbei Shalesh. Your coin can become a fiery coin, a spiritual coin, when you use it to build something good, to charity. So then you suddenly take money, which can be the symbol of complete self-absorption and greed, and it becomes transformed into a body for a higher soulful purpose. And that choice we make every day, every moment of the day, you can actually say. Every interaction. Will it be an Esav or a Jacob thing, or will it be joined together? Because as I said, the goal here is not just to escape into a Jacob spiritual reality. The goal is to be hand in hand with the twin, the body. And at the same time, of course, not a bodily thing without a soul. And that's how Judaism sees the material world. It sees it as a platform, a forum, a channel for spiritual expression. So then, think of it this way. Then your mind, your heart, all your faculties are using the body to express a higher transcendent experience. And then your body becomes very much part of that experience. Now, I know what I'm saying could be very idealistic, and some people say, I'm not there. That's why the goal here is not to jump to extremes. It's to slowly introduce this approach. It's a slow assimilating approach of education where a person begins to begins to become more aware of their soul, and their soul slowly nurtures and educates the body. This is a slow process. It begins in the best possible time in childhood. We teach our children, here's your body, here are your arms, your legs, the rest of your body. These are all tools given to you for you to learn how to express your soul through them. And you do that through the kind words you share to others, with others, through your charity, through your generosity, through virtue, through introspection, through being a mensch, to being a refined human being. That's a soul that is illuminating and flowing through the body. If, on the other hand, a person's soul remains undercover, and you just grow up and saying, it's all about me, me, then you have a soul that's trapped in prison. And there will be a conflict. There will always be a conflict. We have to look at the conflict and smile maybe, because it was all predicted 3,500 years ago in the Bible. So next time you have a conflict, just open up this week's Parsha told us and say, hey, this conflict is going on already thousands of years. I'm not saying that's going to make it easier, but at least you can know you're not alone. That's exactly the way it was meant to be. Two forces, Lu'um Alum Yamatz, two nations, two powers, two forces, two empires, whatever. And they're battling right inside of you right now. I mean, you read Tanya, he explains it. It's not that it makes the battle easier, but it makes it's not so overwhelming. Because that's why you were placed here. There will be a struggle. Someone once came to the Tzemach Tzedek, he's the third Chabad Rebbe, and he was bemoaning the fact, he says, Rebbe, what should I do? I don't have a desire to study Torah. And the Tzemach Tzedek looked at him, he said, what should I do? I do have a desire to study Torah. What did he mean? He said, for me it's easy, I have a desire to do it. You are blessed because you have a challenge. And that's the purpose of life. To desire it is easier, but it's not really the purpose. The purpose is not to have a desire and to create one. It's much more meaningful and much more significant. Understand the exchange? So he said, what should I do? I don't want to do it. And the Rebbe says, what should I do? I do want to do it. Meaning the Rebbe has it easier, but it's not as purposeful. I understand we'd all love to have it that way, but it doesn't always work that way. So the point is that the goal is to know the challenge itself is the purpose. So if you were to know, for example, next time a challenge comes up in your life, a real challenge, and God was able to whisper in your ear at that moment, or send a messenger and told you, something? Don't think this is a real challenge. It's sent here to test you. That's all it is. To see whether you could overcome and whether you could prevail. Your attitude would be very different. Because then it wouldn't be like, oh no, why did this come my way? You'd say, something? This was sent here to see what I'm capable of. So I'm going to prove myself. Like a good competitor. Instead of looking at how do I destroy the competitor, maybe the way is, how do I ingeniously outmaneuver him? And that's how we have to look at things in life. You always know the confidence inside of you that your soul is always intact. The fact that sometimes it's not so easy, that is exactly what was meant to be. Obstacle was placed in your path to figure out how to get around it, to jump over it, develop a greater strength. And when you do, nothing compares to that gratification. We all know that. When you build an immunity, you build a strength over something that yesterday or a year ago, 5 years ago, was a block, it's unbelievable. No one, you can't describe the pleasure from that because it means you prevailed. And then you think back and say, I can't imagine, at that time I didn't think I would ever make it. And you hear this many times. And there are some people who just retreat, or they give in, or they get depressed, etc., etc. So the whole story is really meant to tell you there will be impediments. The road will have impediments. I mean, you see these video games. They have all these little, my grandchildren play them like I don't even know how they move so quickly on these iPads. It's like made for children. They have like the intuitive, you ever see how fast they do it? Kids? I don't know. I can't do that. But, so I'm seeing my little grandson is playing one of these games, one of these things, these little men that jump over and the gold coins and there's blocks and there's trains and this and this. I mean, he's mastered it to who knows what level. But I was thinking about it because the truth is it's really a story of life. Obviously, this is a game, but the story of life is impediments, and can you jump over it or not? Or can you find a way around it? Can you figure out the solution? So it's a whole different type of take on things. I think one of the reasons people are attracted to sports, especially in our day and age, because you don't have to fight the battles. Others are doing it for you. It's like living vicariously through your football team, and all the maneuvers they're making, etc., etc. I don't think many of us would like to be on the field there, especially when you're tackled. But we like to watch it, Like they tell the story about this parachutist, or this guy who wanted to be a parachutist, right? So he enlisted. Okay, so there's this training period. For a month, you go up there on the parachute plane, whatever it's called, and you watch others, how you pack up, technique, method, courage. And you watch, you help out. And then comes your turn after the month. You get online, they pack you up, your time to jump. And he's looking forward to the day. Fine, he thinks he's all ready. Packs up. He gives one look down, 30,000 feet. He says, I'm not jumping. He has, the fear of heights. Okay, fine. The sergeant says, listen, we have your type 2, another month. Some people need a little more time to build up the courage, the strength. Fine, another month he's helping out. Long story short, the month ends. Again, he lines up, he looks down. No. So, okay, at this point, the sergeant says to him, look, this is not made for everyone. Some people simply just are not parachuters by profession. You should find another part of the military and enlist there. You can work behind the desk, you can work on the infantry, maybe something else. Anyway, this is not going to work out. And the guy insists, no, I want to stay here. I like being here. I'll help out. You need people to help up here. I'll stock up the plane. I'll help pack up the parachutes on the backs of the parachutists, whatever. So the sergeant says, why are you insisting? You're not going to jump. What do you want to be here for? He says, I may never jump, but I like to be around people who jump. It makes him feel good. Because he sees other people jump, it makes him feel like, he has courage. So some of us don't jump, but we like to be around people who jump. I mean, actually, I'm not saying this in a positive way. I'm saying that shouldn't be that way. So the chapter at the end of the story tells us a few things. Conflict is inherent in life. Comes with the turf. Just know that. And the faster you embrace that, the simpler life becomes. Because first of all, you don't fight then every conflict. I'm not saying we have to get into conflict and we have to be confrontational. Obviously, you can avoid a situation by all means. But know that things will come your way that are going to be put in your place, in your path, that you will have 3 choices. You'll either freeze in your path and never move again. You'll either retreat and become resigned and depressed, or you'll find a way to get through it. There's a 4th option, that you can end up fighting all the time. That's not what I was suggesting. You find a way. You use your ingenuity. You're not lazy. You dig deeper and say, what do I do with this? And you maybe need advice. You may need friends, and so on. That's number 1. Number 2, to know that the soul is always intact. It doesn't matter what you think about yourself. Never forget that the pilot flame never goes out. The Jacob in you, neshama shenasatabi, taharahi, is pure. As I mentioned in the prayer. And I'll now just review briefly those levels. So it says, first, the soul, I thank you for returning my soul to me every morning. This is actually a meditation you can do every morning, guaranteed to help empower you throughout the day. So that's the first thing. I acknowledge, thank you for returning my soul to me, for renewing my contract, for giving me a vote of confidence for another day of life. That my soul is my primary force, and everything I'll be doing today is all about actualizing my soul, not just about my body. And then it continues. So the soul you've given me is pure. You know that it's absolutely pure, intact, not damaged, nothing has wounded it. The arteries or the pipes may be corroded, there may be some blocks, impediments, but the soul itself is pure. Then comes stage number 2, the soul that you have created. That means the soul manifests on a creation level. That's actually part of the body now. It's not just a pure soul somewhere in heaven or somewhere in a deep unconscious. The soul actually becomes part of the creation of your life. And then the soul that you have shaped. So after, creation can be like a raw piece of matter. Shape is already shape and form. So the soul is starting to take on shape and form in one's life, which is the way we think, our minds work, personality. Now, Barasa, the second is not just that it's a pure pilot flame, but also there's substance. But the substance doesn't yet have shape and form. And then comes the next step where he says, Ata nefachta bi. You have imbued in me. Nefachta is actually from the word vayipach, where it says that God took a piece of earth and breathed a soul of life into the human being. So that's why in Hebrew, neshama and neshima, soul and breath, are the same letters, just a different pronunciation. And you'll see many spiritual exercises always use breath as part of the exercise, because breath is the breath of life, the breath of the soul. It's the divine breath, essentially. So not only did you create the soul, not only is it pure like a pilot flame, not only has it manifest in some substance, and not only has it shape and form, but it's also now like blown into me like the breath. There's a breath inside of me, and when we breathe, it's a per expression. Breathing is the constant flow of life. Exhale, inhale, connected with a heartbeat, contraction, expansion, a constant movement. And then finally it says, Va'ata mishamra bikirbi. You protect it within me, because the soul needs protection. As I said, we live in a hostile world. Physical temptations and forces are constantly inundating us and trying to distract us and draw us to whatever that distraction may be. And we need protection. We need a protector. We need some force. So God is saying, not only is it pure, not only do I create it and shape it and imbue it inside of you, but I also protect it. So you're not going alone. Now, we may not feel it immediately, but when we say this every morning and we keep focused on that, when the challenge comes our way, we remind ourselves that we have all these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 expressions. And it's protected. When we access that awareness, that alone accesses the energy that gives a person strength. Try it out. But remember, a big part of strength in a person's life is not something that you could see. It's attitude. If you believe in yourself, it's probably your greatest weapon. If you don't believe in yourself, even if you have all the tools in the world, you're not going to access it. You see this all the time. Psychological warfare is all based on manipulating that you can't do it, even though you can. How often do people realize at some point? Good negotiation for that matter. You think you have a strong hand, the other person convinces you have a weak hand, and suddenly you lose confidence. You see it in sports, athletes, brilliant athletes, the best in the world. Get into a funk, they suddenly lose confidence. So here you can have one person that has less tools but more confidence, another person has more tools but less confidence. Most likely the one with confidence is going to prevail. Now, I'm not suggesting only confidence. Obviously, we're talking about confidence and resources. But without confidence, resources are almost meaningless, because you don't have the strength and the courage and the drive and the ambition to do something with those tools. And you may even minimize what you think you have because you don't think you can get it done. So when you're aware of the soul and its powers, and you're aware that the conflict was meant to be, and that there's a Jacob in you, and the Esau is meant to come and confront you, that alone is a very big advantage in achieving something. Because instead of you just being completely blindsided, and suddenly something smacks you and you have no clue, where's it coming from? And why do I need this? Most people spend thousands of hours. Why did this happen to me? And they don't realize that question alone is so disempowering. Instead of figuring out that if it happened to me, maybe I have strength to overcome it, they're busy. Why did it happen to me? And why didn't it happen to someone else? It's not fair. They may be even right. It makes no difference, but it doesn't help you because it doesn't solve your problem. All you're doing is agonizing. Why? Whereas if you dig deeper and you realize, 1 second, I have strengths and challenges are meant to be, it's a different attitude. Again, I'm not suggesting it's easy because once a person is in the throes of a challenge, it's not so simple to just step back and say, hey. But if you think about it beforehand, it helps tremendously when you get into that type of situation. And you'll see the people who have overcome the greatest challenges in life had that attitude. You read the stories of Helen Keller and others who were really incapacitated in so many levels, didn't have faculties at work, but they had a certain strength of spirit and dignity. And they had people around them that encouraged it. So no one should ever have such challenges, God forbid. But you see the power of spirit in situations no one would ever imagine that's possible. So imagine you're blessed with health and you don't access that spirit. That's equally tragic. So that's what we're told. That's why the story is such a vital one to read, the details, the conflict. Not always pleasant to read, but it's real. Life is real. The Torah, I remember years ago doing this class, so a person, when I met him, he was far from Judaism in practice. He was a Jew, but he was completely alienated. And then the first time he read the Torah, he said to me, you know something? The Torah doesn't have happy endings. Everything is a conflict. There's no family that's intact. You know, Adam and Eve, they eat the tree. Cain and Abel, Cain kills Abel. And then children are killing fathers, and fathers are killing children, and brothers and sisters. Nobody gets along. The tribes, they sell Joseph, they almost kill him. It's like one big soap opera. That's the way he put it. Everyone's dysfunctional. You know, and then you think that you're finally going to finish the end of the story. Usually ends of books are happy endings, like movies, they have happy endings. No, nobody ends up going into Israel. You read the whole Torah, he was expecting, can't wait to read the end, I'll finally get into the promised land, it was all worth it. And everybody dies, even Moses. So then so he's asking me, what is this? What kind of book is this? It's not very encouraging. Everything is conflict. I remember the way he put it also, he said to me, the Jews, you give them meat? No, we don't want meat. You give them bread? They don't want bread. What about the water? They don't want the water. Constantly, everything you give them is no good. Right? Something like that. Constant complaints. And I remember smiling as he's telling it to me. And I said to him, well, you know, Torah is the story of life. That's what life is like. And without that, he says, absolutely, that's what my life looks like. So the Torah is not here to make us feel good. It's not here to have a happy ending. That's very nice. The Torah is about real life. This is real life. God forbid, it doesn't mean that things are bad. It means that this is real life, and we still will make it. And we still make it to the promised land, and we're still in the journey. So the Jews did not end up becoming extinct. We're here reading the Torah all these years because we learn to adjust to the ebb and flow of life. Yes, life is complicated, and that's the bottom line. So you're either going to fight it, or you're going to ride the waves. And that's a very big difference. Good swimmers ride waves. They know how to navigate. When there's a challenge, you figure out what to do instead of resisting it or just fighting it, period. You figure out a way around, like a good swimmer. When a storm strikes, you think a good swimmer starts swimming? No. They relax then, gather your strength, let the waves carry you. And then when it's calm, that's when you go forward. You have to choose your battles. Anyway, much more to elaborate on all this. I think you read the chapter, apply it to your personal life. I think you'll find, beyond what I've said, tremendous lessons. I've given the basic ones. And the end of the story, which concludes 2 chapters from now, is actually that there is a reconciliation. Jacob and Esau, with all their battles, they end up embracing. And then the Torah says that maybe today there's still not complete unity, but in the end of time, they will ultimately join together, full embrace, full fusion, complete fusion and full integration of body and soul, matter and spirit, where our bodies will actually be true seamless channels for the soul's expression in this world. And the physical world will be a true seamless vehicle for divine expression. And that's what we dream for and what we work for. But it begins how we live our lives right now. And we have, as I said, these choices every moment. So try it out tomorrow morning. Wake up, maybe get a prayer book. Just read these prayers. Even if you read them, think about the intention and see if you can carry that feeling and thought through the day, especially when a challenge comes up. Remember, soul is pure, soul is created, the soul is shaped, imbued inside of us, and protected. And I no doubt in my mind, that type of awareness has to help. Can't say it's going to solve everything overnight, but it's all about conditioning. You condition yourself, you train yourself, you think healthy, you speak healthy, and you act healthy. That's the bottom line. Learning how to condition our thoughts, speech, and action, and learning how to think positively, and learning how to seize the day, carpe diem. So this has been Wednesday night live, Simon Jacobson. It's always a pleasure to sit here with you. Next Wednesday will not be a class because I'm going to Manchester, England. Yes, for a few days I have speaking engagement. I will record a class, so it won't be on location. I will send out an email telling everyone, but I'm just mentioning it to you, just when you got back. So, but the following week will resume live. I mean, on location. But I will record a class next week, meaning it will be only online. If you have not left, if I don't have your email address, please send that to us. And as I've said a number of times, look forward to some great new developments coming the next month or two. And it's been a pleasure and honor. And again, I dedicate the class to Nate and Joanna. Right, okay. Thank you very much.